The Velveteen Rabbit. Written by Margery Williams, illustrated by William Nicholson. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning, he was really splendid. He was He was naturally shy, and being the only one made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior, and they looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of its paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he did not know that other real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like him. And he understood that the sawdust was quite out of date and that it should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooded lion, who was made by the disabled soldiers and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with the government. Between them, all the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him was the skin horse. The skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than many of the others. He was so old that his brown coat had bald patches in it and showed seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive, boast and swagger, and by and break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys, and they would never turn into anything else, for nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced like the skin horse understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean you have things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked. "Or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily and have sharp edges, or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except for the people that don't understand." I suppose you are real, said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive, but the skin horse only smiled. The boy's uncle made me real, he said. That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you cannot become unreal again. It lasts for always. The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before the magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping like a great wind and hustled them away into the cupboards. She called this tidying up. And the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down pretty soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that he had always slept with, and Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to go hunting for the china dog at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. Here, she said. Take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you. And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him in the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after that, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over onto him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he too missed those long moonlight hours in the nursery when the house was silent and his talks with the skin horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made him nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes. And he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together. In whispers, when Nana had gone away to her supper and left the nightlight burning on the mantelpiece, and when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail was becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow and picnics on the grass and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk. And Nana had to come out looking for him with a candle because the boy couldn't sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew and quite earthy from diving in the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed. And Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off in the corner with the corner of her apron. You must have your old bunny, she said. Fancy all that fuss for a toy. The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. Give me bunny, he said. You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He is real. And the little rabbit heard that he was happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said was true. At last, the nursery magic had happened to him, and he was no longer a toy. He was real, just as the boy himself had said. That night, he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it might burst. And into his boot-button eyes that had long lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it. The next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare, if that old bunny isn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived, there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants run to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been made very well, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next they were fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite closely to him, twitching their noses while the rabbits stared hard to see which side of the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that the people who jump generally have something to wind them up, but he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back. And all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain why he had no clockwork. "Oh," said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything," he said. He gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped for the other rabbits not to notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits had very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out its neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy, a rabbit without any hind legs," and he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I'm sitting on them." "And then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit. And he began to whirl and dance until the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said, "and I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he could give anything in the world to be able to jump like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real, and the boy says so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them. With the stamp of his feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I'm real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back, but they never returned. And presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape. He scarcely looked like a rabbit any more at all, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all the Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from underneath the bedcloth. He had never stirred, for he was afraid that if they had found him, they might take him away, and he knew the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, and the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbits found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy could be well again, and they could go out to the garden amongst the flowers and butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned when the little boy lay half asleep, crept up close to the window, and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books while the little rabbit cuddled close to his side. And one day they let him get up and get dressed. It was bright and sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had to carry the boy out to the balcony wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all the while the little rabbit lay under the bedcloth, with his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys the boy had played with must be burnt. "Hurrah!" thought the rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside." For the boy had often talked about the seaside, and he wanted to very much see the big waves coming into the tiny crabs and the sandcastles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she said. "That," said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What? Nonsense! Get him a new one. He mustn't have that one any more." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the picture books and all this rubbish and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. And that was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig, the green peas to gather, but the next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. The night the boy slept in a different room, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush and real glass eyes, and the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside. And that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he couldn't think of anything else. And while the boy was asleep dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, so by wiggling it, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in the proper bed. And by this time, the coat had worn so thin that threadbare from hugging that there was no longer any protection to him. Nearby, he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close to the tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy in the bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden and how happy they were. And a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts and the flower bed and the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, and the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this. And a real tear trickled down the shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower had grew out of the ground. A mysterious flower, not like any that grew in the garden. It was slender and green leaves of color of emeralds, and in the center of the blossom, a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay there watching it, and presently blossomed and opened out stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers around her neck. And in her hair, her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose, where it was damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think of where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. I take care of all the playthings that children have loved. When they are old and worn out, the children don't need them anymore. Then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real. "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," said the fairy, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." and she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. And it was light now, and the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds and the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks and the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they had all stopped dancing and stood around in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," said the fairy. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all that he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit just sat quite still for a moment and never moved, for when he saw the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He didn't know that the fairy had kissed him that last time and changed him altogether. And he might have sat there a long time too, shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose before he thought that he was doing. He lifted his hind toe and scratched it, and he found that he actually had hind legs instead of dingy velveteen and brown fur and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap of joy. Using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling around as the others did, and he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. While he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, and the other one had strange markings on his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted with spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that I lost when I had scarlet fever."